Okay, it's my pleasure and honour to have not one but two head geeks with me today, Sasha Geese and Kevin KLINE, who are joining us for a deep dive series in database personas, how this works, what they relate to in terms of database administration, and the tooling that's relevant for them. And my name is Mark Roberts. I'm the Technical Director here at Prosperon Networks. We are partners for SolarWinds in the UK and around the world. And for the last 18 years, my focus has been very much on SolarWinds and being what I refer to as an enterprise monitoring specialist. And with that, I'm very much here to help and guide our customers to put a good installation of SolarWinds and many other tools in place. Today, as I say, I have Sasha and Kevin. So my job here is really just to chair and let them speak. So first of all, I'll introduce Sasha. Sasha Geese, good afternoon.
Hi there, my name is Sasha and I'm one of SolarWinds head geeks. And yes, you're right, there's two of us in this session. And I'm the so-called international guy. So I deal with Europe, EMEA, overall, and APJ. And today I represent the IT generalist and maybe the accidental DBA. But then I leave.
Thank you very much for that, Sasha. I think that you're going to be doing more than that. You're very much more than the IT generalist. And Kevin, good afternoon. If you'd like to say hello and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I live in the beautiful city of Nashville, Tennessee, and I have been involved with databases since the mid-'80s. So I still kind of deep in my heart have a curmudgeonly belief that Fortran is the best programming language of all. And but I've been staying with relational databases since they were brand new. And I'm happy to be here today to kind of play the part of that expert DBA who spends a lot of time thinking about data and performance, as opposed to Sasha's more broad focus on keeping the whole infrastructure up and running.
And that's very much around these personas. It's identifying the fact that we have a DBA specialist and we have an IT generalist. The requirements and the function that you both provided in your careers are completely different. And this is very much what we want to talk about in this series. So from that point of view, you can see from our agenda, we're going to take you through, have a look at what we consider to be common personas. Clearly, there are many more, but the four that we have on here are things that we see in terms of how people are monitoring their environments, monitoring their databases, how those databases fit in to the services that they are providing functionality for. A little bit on Prosperon. So Prosperon are SolarWinds partners, have been for over 16 years. We provide a lot of functionality to our customers, pretty much handhold everybody from start to finish and make sure that they're getting everything they can. We've done a lot of good work across the board, and most of our work is around helping, let's say, with deployments, design improvements, and also more advanced functionality such as integration to third-party solutions, as well as including our managed services. Now, the database tooling, you can see from the slide that we have on the screen at the moment with regards to these four common personas. In my experience, and certainly working with the organizations that we do, there's lots of them of different sizes, flavors, public sector, private sector. What we are looking at achieving in this deep dive series is very much around the reality of how these users and these personas manage and have to manage and get involved in database administration. They all have different challenges, they all have different needs, and there's very much a different approach that's going to be necessary for each of them. So we're going to take this series to kind of have this deep dive insight into that, and certainly leverage the knowledge, expertise and experience that Sasha and Kevin can bring to demonstrate, let's say, that tooling definition. Now, Kevin, Sasha, from your point of view, I'm interested to hear kind of your stories about how you both first got involved in database management. Certainly from a IT generalist, that kind of first one that we're going to be talking about, this accidental DBA. Sasha, would you like to go first?
Well, I think my first personal experience was playing around with actually a SharePoint and wondering why things doesn't work. So I looked at the database, but it didn't really tell me anything back in those days. But obviously, starting at SolarWinds and dealing with customers basically 5 days in a week, there were loads of problems which we tried to solve with our tools, and they came to us with real world problems. And it's very nice if we were able to provide the tools to help themselves, basically. And that was kind of my angle where I came from. And meanwhile, I'm kind of like deploying SolarWinds in my own environment. And now I know a little bit more what a database does as opposed to a couple of years back with the SharePoint.
Yeah, and that certainly resonates with myself. My first exposure to databases was the fact that there was an application that needed a Microsoft SQL backend. Up until that point, I've been using Access. And so needing to manage and install this new application, get all of that configured, it needed to go against a database server. So that then opened my world to having to learn that application as well. Kevin, how about yourself, sir?
Well, I must be the oldest person in the room here, since I started at a time when a 286 was the leading edge technology in those days. And you were thrilled to have 512 kilobytes of RAM, very, very different times back then. And kind of at the cusp of the decline of mainframe computing. And so I learned how to administrate labs. I was a lab administrator at one of the computer labs at college. And in college, I learned Fortran and was very good at it. And I also was a little bit more forward thinking than some of my colleagues who only learned what they had to in class. I had independently decided to learn about these new relational databases. And so I was able to combine those two skills of knowing how to write a select statement, which was very new in the mid-'80s, and also being able to use Fortran code to write conditional processing for SQL statements, because I hadn't invented stored procedures yet. And so I was able to parlay that into a job at NASA. And so I worked on the team that built the water recycling system that's in use in the International Space Station today. And that was the start of my career. For the first 6 years, I was primarily a developer. So I wrote a lot of front-end code and a lot of back-end code. And then in the early 90s, I moved to one of the big 4 accounting and consulting firms of the world, and started to work on the relational database systems there, and led the SQL Server team for many years as well. So working at very high-end, for the day, high-end database applications throughout my career. And one of the things I discovered all through those early years was that there were very few good tools for managing database systems. And so later on in my career, that became one of my passions, is to think of myself as a senior DBA and think about what kind of tools can we create to make this person more effective and more capable. So I've been in the tools industry ever since the early 2000s.
Fantastic. I don't think we can compete with first job being at NASA. Sasha, no? No.
Well,
okay.
I can throw in Activision Blizzard, but it's not NASA.
That's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, and I love your dedication to carrying that on in your personal life as well with your gaming. Fantastic. Well, thank you both for that. Okay, so we've got those 4 personas. Let's go into our next focus and deep dive, and this is on the junior database administrator. So this is going to be that person that's maybe looking at this as a career path, that they are looking at this as a step up from that accidental DBA. Maybe they liked what they were doing in that role and they want to get more involved. Or it may be obviously the fact that, let's say, they come out of college, uni, first job, and this is the specialist area that suits them. So this is going to increase our knowledge requirements. And so this persona is going to need to have more base knowledge. They're going to have to understand a bit more. And so, again, the tooling needs to fit in with that. It's giving them the right information in the right way so they can go off and apply what they need to do. And this is not going to be as much firefighting, perhaps. They're going to be spending a lot more time in terms of true administration work. And so, again, the resourcing that they are going to need for this. So what we can see on the slide here is the kind of dangers and the issues that are going to be encountered. The first thing here is this: a little knowledge can be dangerous. Well, clearly, I can read a book, I can go on and do a course, I can have a look at an online website, and suddenly I start pressing buttons on my production database server. You tested in Dev First, yes? of course you have. But yeah,
Hopefully.
You're in that scenario. Of course, well, we all have those dev environments to play around with, don't we? And we always follow that. But as I say, when you look online and there's somebody's shared this piece of knowledge, I'll change this setting and this will happen, and you do it and that doesn't happen and bad things do, that's where things can come a little bit unstuck. So again, that journey path, getting the understanding, getting the baseline. We always talk about this in any database administration webinar and content that we talk about. What is your baseline? Getting that in place and then building off of that. Now, if you're a junior DBA and you're lucky enough to have a mentor, someone that's going to take you and guide you and steer you down the job role, indeed your career path to higher levels, this is going to require some learning. And so you're going to be doing courses, you're going to be reading books, but the tooling can very much help in this as well. When you're using your live environments, when you're using your dev environment playgrounds, the tooling that we're going to be going through today is really going to allow you to increase your knowledge. Kevin, I'll just kind of throw a question out to you. When we were talking about the accidental DBA, what would you suggest is one of the fundamental differences as someone kind of moves into this more of a kind of full-time role than what would have been say a firefighting reactive role that would have been an accidental DBA?
Yeah, exactly. And this is the career path that I took. So I was an accidental DBA simply because I was the best developer on the team at things related to the database, SQL statements and that sort of thing. And soon I was put in charge of the database. So I more or less went from that accidental DBA role, which was all about basically keeping your system up and running. If it crashed, you had to do the best you could to kind of debug or find the root cause. So you do some root cause analysis. And at that point, you would either enact a fix, but usually it was beyond my skill. So that meant I had to go out and talk to someone else in the organization who was good at this, or even, log a call with Microsoft support or Oracle support and have those experts walk me through the fix. Once I became a junior DBA, I was less reactive, and I'm trying to get to a situation in which we have improved service levels for our end users. And also one of the things that we began to see as junior DBAs is that the databases that we were asked to supervise, administrate, had more importance to the organization. So whereas me as an accidental DBA might have been given a lot of work on things like a SharePoint database, at the end of the day, we didn't have a lot of money, a lot of our income writing on a SharePoint database. It could go down for an hour and we wouldn't be in big trouble. But once I became a junior DBA, I was starting to take responsibility for databases that were important. If they went down for any extended period of time, it was going to cost the organization money. And so one of the things that became a very important learning step on my career journey was that now I had to figure out not just how to recover from bad situations or fight fires, but now I had to learn how to make things better, generally speaking, right? Make sure that customers were satisfied with the query performance, that the reports were getting generated on time. And that was a very common complaint we would have, is that, well, last week it only took 3 minutes to run this report, but this week it takes 30 minutes to run the report. Find out what's going on and tell me what's happening. And so that is one of the big kind of changes from accidental, is just get this back to operational status. Now as a junior, you're helping not just keep it operational, but make it better. And so that requires a whole different set of information than what you had about things crashing and burning.
And certainly with that is knowing what you've got. We talked at length in the previous persona about the fact that most organizations are running multiple database technologies. It's not just a Microsoft SQL Server shop, and it's not just one SQL Server at that. And so understanding what you've got deployed out there, how it's configured, I said what that baseline is, what's the norm, it gives you then that insight into, okay, well, now I know what the configuration is, what the definition is, what the baseline is. Now you can start learning and applying that learned knowledge to improve, to secure, to make it more performant, to scale it. These are all things that are going to be coming on that journey. And as you say, If an organization has an accidental DBA, that typically means that their value of the data and the databases is low enough that they can't afford to pay someone to do this as a proper job. And so when you then have an organization that do have that investment in that data quality and the value in that data, that's when they're going to have the funds to be able to supply a DBA. Documentation, one of the key things. So what that as is positioned, is there anything else I've missed and you've mentioned there in terms of that responsibility of a junior DBA there, Kevin?
Well, you bring up a very good point. And one of the things that always drove me crazy in those junior DBA days of mine was occasionally I would, every 2 weeks or so, I'd get a call from someone. It would go like this. Hey, this is Mary in finance in New York City, and your database has crashed. And I would say, Mary, I don't even know who you are. I didn't know we had finance people in New York. And why are you calling me? I would be shocked. It's like, what is this? And so you do a little more probing and you discover, okay, well, someone in Murray's department bought a product. They installed it on a powerful PC, put it under their desk somewhere, and it's been running happily for a long time until it breaks. And then the person who has it under their desk calls their local IT guy in that local office and says, hey, Murray, something's wrong with my database. You fix it. And Murray, who's not a DBA, he's a generalist, he says, okay, who can I call now who can fix it for me? And so I, being the next rung up in terms of database supervision and responsibility, would get that call. And so, as you say, knowing what you have is extremely important. And it's also very important to know the relative weight of importance that these different applications carry. It's important to know if it was written in-house, because then it has a lot of champions, the development team, the sponsor of the development team who had the app written, or whether it was a purchased app. And so there may be different levels of expectation from the different organizations in your enterprise. Sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, we bought this application and we want you to fix it. In which case you could push back and say, your first line of support is the vendor who sold you the application. Come back to me if they can't solve it. So you have a different emphasis on what you're doing during the day. And much of the changes that I remember experiencing at that time in my career, believe it or not, was that I had to communicate a lot more with different people. You would have this kind of assumed service level agreement, which may or may not have actually been a real service level agreement. And so people would come to you with expectations about whether you could or would fix something and how much time that would take. And then you would have to respond accordingly. And if you're flying in the dark without any tools to help you figure this kind of thing out, it could be very, very hard to be productive in that role.
Yeah. And Mary, in your example there, she has different priorities. She can't do her work because this application of hers is down. Your work is now being affected because you've suddenly got to learn whatever this technology is that supports this application to then potentially help her resolve it. So very much a key thing in getting that understanding about what you have out there, how it's working, what it actually delivers. A database is not an application that runs in isolation. There's typically a front end, whether it's a console app or often typically now a web-based application that is presenting and managing and interacting with that database for its function. So enough of our slide. Let's get on and have a look at the tooling in play. So we're going to be looking at what we feel is the most appropriate application for monitoring for a junior DBA, and that's the Database Performance Analyzer application. Sasha, I'm going to hand over to you, if that's okay, and you can take us through some of the key features of that application, and we'll have a look and see what kind of information we can get out of it for this role.
All right. I'm still laughing about Kevin's example. This is like borderline shadow IT, what you're describing there.
Yes, exactly.
My team are going to laugh at this internally because Mary in finance is always my example. Whenever I do demos, it's always Mary in accounts. That's really spooky.
Darn it, Mary, spooky. Could you just get it right?
Yeah, Mary, sort yourself out, okay? And I wouldn't have to keep mentioning your name. Yeah. Sorry, Sasha, go for it.
When I used to introduce a tool and explain such a situation to customers, I asked, "Is someone of you called Tom?" No, very good. So Tom in accounting, blah blah blah. Anyway, so if we go back to the database performance analyzer, we just stopped in the last episode and discussed a little bit about what does the tool do. Now let's dig into it a little bit deeper. So I'm going to the SQL Server 17 now, which is somewhere here on my screen. And there's a couple of things I would like to point out. So let's start with the anomaly detection. And we picked the red element here. But oh, wait, let me explain what is the other stuff that we see. So in fact, this is the last couple of days here. March 31st is today, I think. And we just go a couple of days back. And usually you would focus on the big bars, the low-hanging fruit, the easy wins, right? So we try to provide meaningful information within 4 mouse clicks, and that usually works out. Anyway, the overall wait time on top, followed by the anomaly detection. Let's focus on 26th, right? It's one of the bigger bars here. And we see the 24 hours of the day, and we see a couple of elements. On top is the wait time again, but this time not days, it's hours instead, okay? And we could drill down into the hours, and from looking at the chart, you would probably check 12 a.m., 5 a.m., and so on, the big ones, okay? So if we look at the one at the bottom, we will see the anomaly detection, and there's only 3 of those bigger bars who probably caused an issue or experienced an issue, to say it that way. And let's focus on 2 p.m. maybe and see what we will get over there. And the information here is a little bit of blocking, but we will look into this in a few more seconds in a different way where we change the query. What I would like to point out here is it's really easy to navigate. We see the day and the hour, and it's currently, well, an hour between 2 and 3 o'clock. If we change into the time slice view, we could drill down into minutes, and even I think the minimum is 5 seconds or so. So it's quite granular level of information that we would be able to see here. Now, we mentioned the query advisors. Let's have a look if this one here is useful. So it's still the same database, still the same day, and we look at the top query. We picked one here, which is 4500 query, and there's lots of information here. So on top, we see the query advisor again, and we walked through that feature already. Now we see it actually in use. So we see some elements that the tool discovered already. And we also see advisors. So inefficient steps is kind of what we see here. And also what we see, if I scroll down a little bit, we see that we actually might face some resource issues here, as the system is actually showing it up. Well, yeah, debatable, but definitely something that we could spend looking at. So let's look into this element. So again, there's nothing too crazy here, but we discovered inefficient table.
One of the first things that pops out to me here is this is an orders table. Is this a database that's being used for an e-commerce application? If so, I mean, is this causing problems? Is the order process that our customers are processing on the front end of a website now being affected by this? Is it slow? Is they getting error messages? That may be costing my business money if that's the case.
Exactly. It will cost your business money, because one of the things we've learned, particularly with the Gen Z people who came of age after the millennium, for them, slow is the new down. So you have a website that is taking 13 seconds longer than they want to wait, they'll just move on to a competitor. So you don't want your e-commerce sites to be slow, because it might as well be down. They won't wait for it to come back around.
Well, if you want to put a pair of shoes in a basket and it's too slow, then you move on. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing on the screen here that we've got really key metrics. I can understand and I can see immediately that what this table is touching, what indexes are linked to it. The fact that this query is touching 15 million rows, I mean, that could be an anomaly in itself.
Exactly. Yeah, on an e-commerce website, you're not typically going to be looking at lots of rows. You'll be doing singleton lookups for a piece of inventory. You'll do a singleton lookup for placing an order. Maybe you'll do an insert to say, let's add one to this particular shopping cart. So when you're looking at massive rows like that in your kind of application, that should raise some alarms.
And again, there is information everywhere. So we see clustered index scan. What is it, and why do we care about this? And if we compare this level of information, so the feature itself is very similar to what we've seen in the previous session with Server and Application Monitor, but the depth of knowledge is completely different. So this is not just quickly shooting, okay? This is on a level where we provide loads of background for someone who's able to use this information.
And this is perfect for a junior DBA because this is the sort of thing that you're now starting to take very seriously. You've learned a little bit about indexes. You've heard that indexes can make things faster. But what's the difference between a clustered index and a non-clustered index? What's the difference between a scan and a seek? So this kind of add-on information isn't just a nice to have. It's critical mentoring for those of us who are junior in our career and need to advance that skill level to truly answer the needs of our organization.
Okay, so I just said we look at a different screen, and what I would present is the current view. And this is pretty cool because it shows what's happening right now. It's always the last hour. There's actually a refresh here on top, okay? And as long as that is turned on, it will automatically jump on into the next bracket. So this is kind of a condensed view of all the stuff that is that we saw in a moment ago, and shows all the important information. And this is absolutely amazing to put it on a screen because it shows what's happening right now. And that will give a great indication if stuff is going downhill, or in our case, it would probably be uphill because the wait time is going up. And we see important elements at the bottom. So we could potentially drill down here, but again, I would consider this as more like a passive view, which you put on a screen. And I don't know, I think Kevin mentioned the NOCs, right? So this might be a great dashboard for a NOC.
Absolutely. One of the things actually I've liked about this screen is when somebody's made a change. So if that advisory there was there to create a new index, and it actually tells you what that query should be, if you then go and apply that, you're then going to come into this screen and you're going to have a look at this and you're going to see what impact that may have immediately. Have you suddenly seen your performance metrics? So you can see at the bottom there your resourcing level. Has there been a knock-on effect? Maybe this was a query that was impacting or causing blocking or being affected by blocking. Does that immediately take that away? So this kind of near live visibility that we have is really great for that kind of causal effect of change that you've applied.
And depending on what is happening here, we would then drill down in the respective brackets. So if we would see blocking, no blocking right here, but if we would see blocking, we could easily spot this when we click back to the server. Here's a little bit of a memory issue, apparently. So we could click here, or we would just go straight to resources, which will show us information from the machine. Again, this is level that we would probably get out of Server and Application Monitor. We also get it out of SQL Sentry. So this is information about the underlying machine, and we could just pick whatever might be causing us a headache right now. Mark, do we talk about virtualization for 5 seconds?
Of course. So certainly with regards, more and more organizations that we see are insisting that the applications have to run, and the SQL databases, should I say, have to run on virtual. And you know, and I know, and everybody that looks after a virtual infrastructure, that noisy neighbor issue, the fact that SQL is intensive, it uses a lot of memory, it loses a lot of CPU, it certainly uses a lot of disk on some databases. So that is often the noisy neighbor. So I love in terms of the display here, it's how is the virtualization layer being affected by and is affecting my database performance?
And this is actually picking up information from the vCenter or from a standalone ESXi, but usually you would have a vCenter. And you see here at the right-hand side VM. So this is information that we pull from the virtualization layer. And there's loads of interesting elements here. So for example, if Mark just mentioned the noisy neighbors, we would see stuff here at the lower half of the screen. Those little arrows are actual events in the virtual infrastructure. And that is pretty cool because it would give us an explanation of stuff happening somewhere on the host level, which might have an impact on the database. But also, top right corner, we see a couple of buttons over there. And again, we would see the current overview. VM config can be pretty cool as it will show like prioritization, difficult word for me to pronounce, of resources, of host resources. And actually, we do see the host resources here too, if we click into this. But the nice feature is really get information from other VMs, the host level, into DPA.
And one of the things that Mark mentioned was a ubiquitous problem we have with virtualization with the noisy neighbor. But one of the things that we find with virtualization is that, particularly for the junior DBA, people have not really worked very, very hard to segregate those different guest VMs on the host. And so not only is the noisy neighbor sometimes caused by a SQL server and impacts others, but then we have the inverse happen, where an app server or perhaps a business analytics process is the noisy neighbor. And when that impacts your database, if it's that e-commerce site, well, you know you've got to do something pretty quickly because the nature of the VM is that it might dynamically provision more resources if one of the other neighbors get busy. So these kind of graphs that Sasha is showing us are extremely important to maintain a well laid out, a well-designed virtualization environment. So if you don't have these kinds of views of both the database and the different guests on your host, which vSphere doesn't really give you, then you're going to have a lot of difficulties. But when you have this view, it can make your life so much better. So if you haven't ever looked at this before, I really strongly encourage you to do that if you're working in a virtualized environment.
Oh, that's fantastic, Kevin. That's really useful. And certainly the insight that we've seen on the demo, and thank you, Sasha, for this, is the DPA application, the understanding, the surfacing of issues, the abilities when you drill into it of a junior DBA to take their existing knowledge and make sense of what's being displayed because it's there, it's in front of them, it's structured in a way where they can consume it. But also they are very conscious that they're still learning their trade and bringing to the surface these advisories, telling them, as we started to see there, that there's an index that could be created and here's the query to go and create that index. This is holding their hand. This is giving them the guidance that they can then apply their knowledge. They can learn from what's being told. They can do further research and say, actually, yes, this would be a useful index. And yes, this query is correct to go and create that clustered index and go and apply it. And as we saw when we look at that current and when we look at the continuation of that, what is the outcome of that? Has that had a positive impact that we were hoping and expecting? So the tooling is absolutely critical in their arsenal to be able to use that, to go in, perform the functionality they need from a reactive point of view. We've already discussed that that's probably going to be lesser than the fact that the DBA is able to go in there and be more proactive. And this is always a target point, being able to be in control, know what you've got, know what your baselines are, use that anomaly detection to identify where it varies from that pathway. You're now giving that ability to then go and fix these things and be in advance of them and prevent them even happening in the first place. So we've provided some links on the screen at the moment. Go and get some more information. One of the things that you can see at the top there is this ability to put a trial in place. If you're a junior DBA, go and put it in. Have a play, populate it with one or two of your databases, maybe different technologies. see what it brings to the surface, see if that makes sense to how you're using your database technology, and maybe it's just a playground, maybe it's just something for you to learn. Maybe there's, say, that value in this being something that you have available full time. So thank you very much for your time today. Sasha, Kevin, as always, a pleasure to have you aboard. Your knowledge and insight is, as I say, invaluable. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And if you've liked anything you've seen on this series of database personas, please reach out to us. Our website, prosperon.co.uk, is certainly a method to contact. We also have a LinkedIn and Twitter location. You can find us on Prosperon. And we also have our YouTube channel, which actually may be where you're watching this video now.